So now it's just starting to get snug. It's not tight yet. But now we know our heads are sitting perfectly even onto the shell. So it makes the next stage far easier to do. So the next tool I use is a drum dial, which just allows you to really accurately check the tension of your head all the way around, especially when you have lugs that are close together. There are other tools for this, things like these tension rod adjusters, but I find that the biggest fundamental flaw is if there's any drag or not enough lube on your hardware, this can drastically affect the tension of each individual lug, and even though it may be pulling evenly, it might take more to pull this lug than it will to pull this one. So I find these drum dials are a far more accurate representation of the tension of your head. It comes with a little spacer like this, and that's just to allow you to keep a consistent distance away from your rim. You can go around and check your fine tension of your head. Try to pick an even number and start with that. Each person likes their drum tuned so differently from high to low. I just go around, I take my time, I bring it up in small increments as to not stress the wooden hoops and or the shell, because they are a fine instrument. They don't need to be heavily distorted. But if you back the tension off, it's good to flex the head and let it come back so that it reseats the head. Then it gives you a lot more of an accurate representation of the tension in your head. Just ensuring that there's not a large variance. A few points at this stage is not a huge ordeal. So before we bring the top head up too much, we'll flip it over and bring the bottom head up so that we're keeping the stresses more even on the bottom, or on the center ring. Let's start at a reference point again. And check it. You can tell just by evenly setting your head the difference already. The heads are that much more even to begin with, so it makes it a lot easier to bring up. You don't have huge variances in your numbers. We didn't have too much difference, so now we can start bringing it up a bit. Try to do it in even increments and go across. I usually do half turns. Then your head is being increased in a much more even fashion. Bringing it up, I don't think you'd want much more than 2 or 3, at most 5 units of tension, I guess. I'm not sure exactly how they rate their tensions, but I mean, each person is going to like their heads tighter or looser on the grand scheme of things. The key is the balance of the load all the way around so that it's absolutely equal, so that when you pitch match, all your tones are as even as possible. You don't want a high one and a low one. So setting your head evenly like that just helps and makes that task a lot easier in the long run. This head's getting to be nice and snug. We'll maybe bring it up to close to 70 all the way around. Now if you are servicing your drum and you've used it for a while, lots of dust eventually collects alongside the bottom of the resonant head and likes to work its way in between the skin and your bearing edge. So it's a good practice that when you disassemble it, it doesn't hurt to take and use a board, glue sandpaper to it, and take your shell and just true the bearing edge by just giving it a light sand. and then it'll eliminate any minor highs and lows and imperfections in your bearing edge to ensure that you have a nice smooth bearing edge for your skin to ride on, because you don't want to see dust or dirt particles wedged in between your skins, because ultimately that will affect the performance of your drum. Though subtle, all factors combined can have detrimental effects. So anything that you can eliminate by just a small fix improves the quality and caliber of the music that you're able to put out with your instrument. And these are a fine instrument, and they should be treated as such. So now we've got a pretty good balance all the way around. We're running at 70 on the top head. On the top head, because the skin's a little thicker, assuming that the consistency of the material that your head is made of is absolutely consistent, store-bought ones are going to be about as close as you get. If you start going into calf skin heads, there's a lot of variance in even a single sheath, because there will be minor differences in thickness which will ultimately affect the tension. The store-bought heads are relatively consistent, so you don't have to worry about that factor as much. A minor deviance of a couple points could be something as minimal as a couple thou difference in the thickness of the skin material, slight inconsistencies in fabrication. I'm sure Evans has a pretty high tolerance of making a consistent product, but even the most consistent products, there are slight variances, so you can't expect it to be absolutely perfect all the way around. So now we're starting to get some nice tension to it. I'll maybe even bring it up just a little bit higher. So it's getting to be pretty even. Notice the consistency of the pitch is pretty even all the way around, which allows your drum to play very consistently no matter where you play on the head. It's going to sound the same, as opposed to having high and low spots. We'll call that tight enough for now until we put the snares on and test it out a bit. So now we can flip it over and start lacing the snares on. When I lace my snares, I lace them from the snare hardware down towards the snare wires, because I find it's easier to play with the knots up there than it is on the side. So get your strings evenly set up, and then fish them through your holes. So when you start to get a small fray, I just warm up the end with a lighter and just give it a little roll, then it seals in the end so that it doesn't fray. I've seen other wood hoops with large cutouts into the wood hoops to allow room for the strings, but I feel that it robs a lot of the structural integrity of a beautiful wood hoop. You go through all that effort of making one, and then you do huge cutouts and it just takes away all of the strength. And so when first setting up your snare wires, they usually take a few different tensioning processes, because they take a while to stretch the strings out. The snare wires have to get stretched evenly. There's usually one or two that are loose, which results in snare buzz. When I'm first setting it, I ensure that my fine tension is threaded pretty well all the way out, so I have lots of adjustment. And then on the other side, I make sure that my snare release is fully disengaged. So then I pull my strings tight. I generally offset it to the side of the adjustment because most of your travel is going to happen on the snare release side. It's going to be pulling the most, where this side pretty well stays fixed. Once it's engaged, you're able to check to see if it's tight. So there's some snare buzz, which means that your snares are not quite tight enough yet. You must ensure that your plates are lined up the same both ways, because a slight misalignment alone will make one side tight and the other side loose, which it is at the moment. You can see that it's vibrating. So this is kind of the finicky part. There isn't much science to it. It's more trial and error and tightening it up. I push down on the head, tighten the knob, which gives you your fine adjustment, and then while doing so I make sure that this side is disengaged and then engage it after the fact. So it's slowly becoming less, and this once again is an issue of self-preference. Some people like snare buzz, some people do not. It all comes down to the style of music and the rest of the kit that you're playing with. So it's starting to get a lot tighter now. I'll grab a stick and see what it's on. There's not too much ring afterwards. It sounds pretty good. I mean, once again, it's a preference of choice. So that is the general assembly and disassembly of a prestigious percussion snare, with all the minor details entailed of making a tight drum. And whether you want to tune it up or down from there is purely your choice. Usually when I ship them, I assemble them but leave the heads loose, just to allow for temperature fluctuations as they're getting transported. If they go through hot and cold, you do not want your snare fully tensioned up and going from hot to cold to hot to cold, because not only does it stress the shell, it distorts the skins, and in general you don't really want to do that. As it's traveling, you usually want to travel with it with the snares disengaged. It's less likely to stretch or distort your snare wires, because if they're tight and something gets caught, it'll end up stretching one of these wires more than the rest of them, and it'll cause snare buzz and in lots of cases drive you crazy. So, thank you. Have a great day.